Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. We are joined today by my good friend Grant Turner. Mark Ostrander is on vacation celebrating his anniversary, and even though he doesn't believe in saying happy birthday to us, we will say happy anniversary to him, GT.
Love it.
How are you, man?
Oh, it's great.
You doing good?
Doing great, buddy. Doing great.
Saw a video back in the Grandview Wrestling Room. That's got to be chicken soup for the soul.
It's always good to get everybody back, and everyone's on campus now. School started, so it's going to be great.
Good numbers again, good kids. Everybody locked and loaded this early in the year.
So far, so good. We'll see how everything gets rolling here.
For sure. All right, let's talk. Let's start with the portal. Okay. So a couple of things here. Brayton Lee from Minnesota is in the portal. Josh Humphrey from Lehigh, who was an All-American this year. I think he was third. He was third. Brayton Lee was an All-American 2 years ago, came back from injury, had a subpar year for him. They're both in the portal. And then Michael Blockus isn't in the portal, but is coming back after fighting professionally in Bellator. So let's start with these guys in particular, and then we'll go bigger picture on portal. Michael Blockus coming back is very interesting to me because literally I watched him fight on TV on Showtime. And so I thought he was done wrestling. And then Josh Humphrey would be, if he comes back, if he came back to Lehigh would be big, but if he's in the portal, he's looking to go somewhere. That's a guy that scored 15 points at the national tournament. I mean, that guy's a big swing for the right lineup, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to me that he would be in the portal to go to a different location. But definitely he's somebody that was extremely highly touted at the NCAA. Very high seed. Also had a lot of buzz around him. Potentially could have made finals. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see that. And then I think the biggest shock is Block is coming back more so than like Humphreys, because I thought he was all the way out the door, like. Going on into fighting or going into MMA, I should say. Just seemed to be. I just thought that door, part of that would have gone on.
Well, I think the Blockus coming back and Brayton Lee portal things certainly seem like they're connected, right? Like I think Blockus is. I saw in Earl Smith's rankings that he has him projected at 157. So we did our quick initial before anybody moved around or redshirted or gray shirted or transferred. And the returning All-Americans at 57 are Levi Haynes, but Humphrey's second. He took third last year. Basically, the champion O'Connor was out, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all back. So they slide up to 127. And then Blockus took 8th at the weight class below at 149. If he slid in, if Mark and I were doing the rankings, we would have him 8th. So, he obviously becomes a threat. Minnesota's had a terrible year in the portal. I was texting somebody about this. They lost Nagao. They lost Spratley. They lost Jamison. They're going to lose Brayton Lee. I mean, these guys that go in the portal don't come back. I know everybody says, well, I might come back, but they don't come back. And then they may or may not lose Gable to either a portal transfer or just him going and living his life. But I mean, they had a squad. If it's interesting I guess in Minnesota in general, what do you think is going on that it's been such a rough off season for them portal wise? Just bad luck, or do you think just?
I mean, it's really hard to like all of the usual suspects would be, like there's something wrong with the program. There's whatever, like the coaches are on their way out, or like whatever it may be. Like just the the usual things you would see when a whole bunch of people start like leaving a program, they're like, whatever, there's something going on there. I really don't think that there's anything going on in Minnesota. Like him and Becker and Sanders and Granville, all those guys are really good guys. There's no scandal to be had there.
Right.
So I'm not really sure what it is. I think that there's probably instances for specifics, like maybe Spratley wanting to go back to Oklahoma. I don't know what's going on with Brainley. Weird things happening for both Gable and Blockus, maybe being able to maybe come back. I think there's just a lot of different factors that are going on there. But I mean, it's very perplexing. You don't see a lot of other programs having this much exodus in the past year.
Yeah, I agree. And my mom teaches stuff, and what she talks about is like sometimes in a scenario, each individual situation can be explained, but when you look at it collectively as a whole, it gives you a different impression. And that feels like this is it here. Like if you said, hey, Spratley was behind the key, so that's why he left. Maybe Jameson is his best friend, so he went with him. And then you go through and you say, well, Brayton Lee, well, if Blockus came back, that's why. Maybe Nagao knew he could get more money somewhere else, so tested the market. So, I mean, but then you look at all of them together, and I don't think there's anything wrong with Gable at Minnesota. You certainly actually have a relationship with Gable, personally and professionally, but I've never heard him say a bad word about Minnesota at all. I mean, in fact, I would think he loves it there, and that's the place he's most likely to come back to. That guy is just a unicorn where there's some unique circumstances where he has opportunities most of us would never have in a lifetime that he has before he's turning 25 years old. But collectively, it's just an interesting look. Those guys couldn't have ever. They're the nicest guys in the world. Like when I went up to prep for Minnesota Border Brawl and stuff like that. So, but it is just an interesting look overall. So the next thing I wanted to talk about big picture with you is the portal. So I was watching Flow and they were talking about the impact of the portal, and I love Shane Sparks. Like he's been very good to me in my career and helped me out. And he mentioned, and I just don't think he had kind of done the research, that the portal is really just a bunch of backups. And that a football coach had said that. And I'm a college football fan, but not like I am a wrestling fan. But even if you even look at like Caleb Williams, who won the Heisman last year, or like Jalen Hurts, who transferred, who's top 3 fantasy quarterback in the NFL right now. These guys, big names transfer. But what I did yesterday was I looked, Earl Smith put out their rankings at Intermat, and Earl and I are friends, and he also does 33 deep, which you've heard Mark and I talk about how difficult that is to rank, the last 9-10 guys gets really tough. But if you take the guys that have been in the portal and switched teams, the highest ranked guy at each weight, here it is. At 125, Matt Ramos is number 1. Aaron Nagao at 33 is number 3. Real Woods at 141 is 2. Voinovich is number 10 at 49. Franek is number 2 at 57. Caliendo is 5 at 65. Shane Griffith is 4 at 74. Truax is number 2 at 184. Buchanan is 2 at 197. Kirkfleet is number 1 at heavyweight or 285. If you add up their placing points, and that's how you do rankings in the preseason, you can't put bonus in, that's 142 points. And if you compare that to what they have Penn State at, they have Penn State at 141.5 points. Now, obviously, that team couldn't wrestle against Penn State for a couple of reasons, including there's a couple Penn State guys on there. But to say that the portal's not having a massive effect when the all-portal team would be ranked number 1 in the country right now is pretty insane, right?
Yeah, and once again, just to preface, I think we talked about this off air the other day, is that the all-portal team would be collective of not just the past 12 months of transfer portal, meaning from last year, this is all-time transfer portal.
Right. Correct.
So I just wanted to make sure that the listeners knew that, because when I was having a conversation with you yesterday, I was confused at the very beginning of when you were basically detailing this out. And I'm like, oh yeah, that guy, he transferred like years ago. But
Yeah.
To your point, yes, the transfer portal, especially within, I would say, our sport and maybe other sports that maybe don't have as much participation as Division I football or Division I basketball, it's extremely impactful when you have an All-American go to another institution that was also like, because the point value of what you get at nationals is so tight.
Yeah.
You know that there's that clump of programs that can score anywhere between 25 and 55 points, and really that can be determined by one finalist.
Yes.
Right? So, having somebody that was, like a top 3 guy or a top 8 guy, all of a sudden come into your program and you already had 3 or 4 All-Americans, now you're at the top of that 55-point food chain. And then now you're vying for like a top 15, top potentially 10 program.
Yeah.
If you have a bit of a swing there, which then you can get some other guys qualified or have better dual success, whatever it may be. But yeah, I think that when you have even, let's say, a smaller percentage, but the higher percentage of guys that make a bigger difference, like bona fide starters and All-Americans transferring portals to programs, I mean, that can leverage a program to be, in the cellar of a conference and then all of a sudden vying for a conference title.
There's a million examples of what you're saying mathematically being correct. Just look at Northern Colorado this year, okay? Or Air Force, right? You take one guy, Wyatt Hendrickson or Andrew Alirez, and look at where they ended up placing as a team, because it's so fundamentally skewed, right? Like if you and me go win nationals, we don't bonus anybody that's 40 points. Our team is going to be in the top 12 in the country. Okay, and it might be you, me, Nick Mitchell, and the Seven Dwarfs.
Yeah.
Say Nick Mitchell got hurt, it's still a lot to do there. So I think what's also interesting about this is Woods, Voinovich, Franek, and Caliendo are all at Iowa. Nagao, Truax, and Kirkfleet are all at Penn State. So to say that this is not impacting the team race is just absurd. I mean, so for example, Intermat did their rankings and they made a decision, and I don't know what I would have done. Let me ask you this. We'll start with the decision and then go to this. They chose to not rank anybody that's involved in the gambling scandal. Anybody whose names have been reported. Okay, now there's no validation of this. If you were doing rankings, and we don't need to get into what your process would be, would you include those guys or would you exclude them?
I would exclude them.
Okay.
Until I was given information that they are ready to go for the season, because there's a lot of stuff that's going on with those athletes in their situation that could potentially be problematic for those teams. To give, like, I don't know, let's say, use Northern Colorado as an example. They had a whole bunch of guys that were ranked pretty high, and all of a sudden, they're preseason top 3 in the nation, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, they were preseason top 3. They really,
right,
failed to meet their expectations that they had at the beginning of the season. It's like, well, they should have never been 3 due to all of the things. Once again, we're using Northern Colorado as an example. Just know that, like, this is an example for an example's sake. This could be any program. But like, all of a sudden you you're preseason top 3 and they end up being 51st. It's like, well, they never would have been third in the nation had they had the rankings done with what was actually available. So I'd much rather have the rise to success where they all come back and then they're in the lineup and then they're ranked whatever it is later in the season rather than in a preseason. Because I mean, once again, I'm getting used to being a ranking guy. Not a ranking guy. I'm not big on it per se because I'm still in that kind of like coaching mentality where I'm like I don't really care about rankings and
right. As
so,
you should be. Yeah.
But I understand the complexities of rankings, and I understand that the projections and things that we discuss on this podcast that rankings do matter, and they do carry a lot of weight to seeding and all of these other things. So I'd much rather have the rise to success that where they start beating people and they start jumping rather than hey, all of a sudden you have somebody that's in a gambling scenario that was ranked third in the nation, but he just takes that third spot
right
for 3 months. And then you don't know what's going to happen.
No, it's for sure. There's a lot to process. It's interesting because as you say your point, I think you might sway me. Okay. Okay, I see that. I would probably rank them. And I would rank them because in my mind, they're not punished until they're punished. So in my mind, go ahead.
No, I totally understand that. I can see both sides of the coin, knowing that that's hey, listen, they're on the roster still. They're still, they're still a viable option. Now, once again, week 2, I could have you be third. Right now, I don't have you. It just depending upon what the rankers idea or concept is. And once again, you guys have taught me this, whatever your system is, stick to your system.
Yes.
However, in which case then I don't have a system. I
just wake up in the morning with good hair.
I just
do my thing.
I'm hey, guess what? You're fit this week. Don't care. But I think that's the point that I think you guys hammer home when it comes to rankings is just whatever you think is the manner in which that you would pursue this, then I think that you have reasonings and you have factual information or data to be oh yeah, well, he's still on the team, he's still a viable option until he's basically not an option. And I'd much rather say, and then from my point of view is well, hey, it's you're injured. I don't know if you're coming back.
So that's a very, very tricky one when you're doing rankings, right? Because, and you're a coach. So let's put it this way. Let's say that we're doing the NAI rankings and I'll just use Ben Lee because we always joked, you and me would privately joke that if I ever had a bodyguard, I would want it to be Ben Lee. So let's say that he was injured. You and Nick and the crew know how injured he is. There's nothing for you to gain by disclosing the extent of the injury.
Yep.
Even if it's minor, because the problem then is if you go, hey, it's just a little chicken bite, he hyperextended his elbow a little bit, he's just gonna chill for a week. Okay. Because when it's serious and you don't say that, then we know it's serious.
Right.
So injuries are another tricky one. So I pulled up Intermat's team rankings and I pulled up Flo's team rankings, and I will give my personal disclosure on this. Rankings are incredibly difficult to do in this fact that they're really time consuming and it's hard to get all the data. And anybody who's taken a shot at it, I give them a ton of respect because I did it for 5 years with Mark's help. And it's just a lot of work. So Flo did their rankings and now, first of all, they did them earlier and they kept the Iowa guys in. They had Iowa at second with 73.5 points. Intermat did it recently and came out with Iowa at 8th at 48 points. And just so if you think, well, maybe they ranked a bunch of other guys different, they had Penn State at 141.5 versus 142. Virginia Tech was at 64.5 versus 65. Missouri was at 65 versus 62. So they're really similar. Okay. Cornell was a 1.5 point delta. So, I mean, they just pulled those guys out. Now, when you pull them out, other things happen. Other guys slide up, and so there's a few more points. But in general, they pretty much have a lot of the guys within a spot or two of each other. So I just think it's really interesting because obviously how this plays out is going to be hugely impactful on the season. I have a theory on this, but we talked briefly about this, and it was all three of us. What is your opinion on how you think this will play out this season?
I think buckle up. I think it's going to be a wild ride for this first semester. Because I don't think a lot of these things are going to be finalized before even the season starts.
I agree with that.
I think legitimately you're going to go into like the Cliff Keen invite, and you're going to go into like some of these other things with like a humongous bunch of question marks. Also, just know that like as we've seen in the past few years, the development of the freshmen that are coming out, there's going to be a lot more household names that like you start to see, making big jumps, like the Levi Haynes and Van Ness's of the world. There's a lot more of those at other locations, such as, Iowa, Ohio State, Oklahoma State. There's some guys that like we're waiting in the wings that you're going to get to know extremely well that could get an opportunity based off of these other instances that are happening, injuries, gambling, transfer portal, all these other things. So it's like, you're gonna have a whole bunch of new names to learn come November.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to say this preemptively. Happy anniversary to my parents. Their 56th year. They came over last Sunday with barbecue, stuff like that. And we're talking about this. And it was a very interesting conversation because my parents are brilliant, but they're not involved in the day-to-day data of things. Like they kind of knew what was going on at a distance and kind of gave them a little more of a drill down on it. But as we talked about it, my mom brought up something that's really interesting. She said, how would you like to be the prosecutor that has to prosecute this case in the state of Iowa? Where potentially it's I think most people would look at it as a victimless crime. Right? It's not like I stole money from you, you beat me up, you hit my car, I did XYZ to you. Like these kids may or may not have broken the law, but there's no real suffering on the other side of it. I think there's a very real chance that these kids all get like a half a season suspension, and then it gets worked out with the prosecution. I think this is not, people want to say politics and money don't matter. Politics and money matter in everything in life. Like if money didn't matter, there wouldn't be a portal for the most case. I mean, there's a few people that just want to leave because they're unhappy with their coach, and that would exist. And, good for those opportunities. But the portal guys that we're talking about are guys that moved, that there's some NIL or something attached to it, bigger scholarship, something. Yeah. So I just think there's a very real chance that just when you think about it, and I have zero insider knowledge on this, okay, like none. But just walking through it, I mean, I remember one time I went on vacation. This is back when I was married, and I came back, and there was a police card, a business card from a police on my kitchen island. I don't even know how they got in my house. And so I said to my wife, I'm like, what is this? She goes, I don't know. I call it. Some kids had broken into, they had these automated garage openers, broke in, stole some golf clubs from people and stole 2 of my golf clubs. And so I called the number, figure the whole thing out. And they said basically they said like they stole enough clubs that it's a felony. But they're like, look, these are rich. Their dad's just going to write a check. They're just going to get out of it. So you can say you want to press charges, but that's just going to change the amount of the check. And you're not going to get any of the money anyway. I suggested they come up to my wrestling practice. This one I was at Merrimack for an hour and a half and let the guys give them restorative justice. But that was quickly shut down. The prosecutor actually thought it was a great idea, but didn't think the kids would agree to it. And, that's when we had Duran and Jamel on the team. So they certainly would have learned a good lesson. Right. I just think there's a chance that nothing goes on like that. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing. So I think you're right. Buckle up. The news is going to come when it comes. But, I mean, there's certainly people working in the background to make sure that it goes the way they want it to. So, and I get that there's rules, but it is you should follow the rules. If you know the rules, it's like following the law. At the same time, when 1 out of 50 states is going after them hard, it's pretty interesting. So, who's number one is let's while we're on this subject, let's go to Olympic red shirts. So GT. Flo put out a really good article. If you guys want to Google it, it's basically just go on Flo and type in Olympic redshirt qualifier list. So here's the criteria. There's 6 criteria. Past national team member, top 8 at the April U.S. Open, top 8 at the upcoming December Senior Nationals, top 3 at the 2023 NCAAs. Number 5 is a twofer. You have to have been a D1 champ and top 2 from U23s of 2023, or a previous U17, U20, or U23 world medalist. So, first of all, what are your thoughts on that list? I lost you for a second. You there?
Oh, yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. There's a lot to unpack there when maybe talking about maybe some specific athletes and how people are going to qualify for things. But it opens up the door for some of those guys that, maybe haven't necessarily been on the scene for a while, but maybe did. I'm specifically talking maybe about like a David Carr, didn't really wrestle on the senior level last year, but was on the scene a couple of years ago, made multiple teams previously. Like, I think there's going to be some guys that kind of come up through the woodwork. And I think as also just with as much recent success as we had at U20s and U23s,
right,
you're going to see some guys like, pop up there and maybe beat some guys that maybe they're not supposed to here in the upcoming season.
Right. So they have the list that could still become eligible if they win a medal at the U23s. Julian Klebo, Brock Hardy, Doug Zaff, and the parentheses there is potentially if Sammy Sasso no longer wrestling at U23s, which is 100% going to happen, that Sammy Sasso is not going to wrestle. Julian Ramirez, Dustin Plott, Nick Stemmet, Yusuf Lilly, and then 3 Greco guys. Okay. So Cooper Flynn has taken his Olympic red shirt. That's really smart because him and Ventresca are there anyway. This saves him a year of eligibility. Obviously, I'm sure Cooper believes he can make the Olympic team. He'd also get really long odds if he did that. So no disrespect, but not in that first tier of contenders. When you think about like the Zane Richards and then the Gilmans and Soriano, Spencer Lees, Dayton Fixes of the world. So here's just a quick rundown of big names. Air Force, Wyatt Hendrickson, Arizona State, Teamer, Schultz, Figs, Cornell, Arujau, Shapiro, Cardenas, Foca, Illinois, the Bronicle brothers. One of them is going to take it. Luffman, Iowa, Assad, Cassiope, Keeter, Real Woods. Important to note here, Assad and Cassiope cannot Olympic redshirt their way out of this gambling thing if it comes up. Iowa State, David Carr, Will Lewan, Lucas Davison, Joel Adams, Michigan. Mizzou with the Elam brothers and Keegan. NC State, Hidley, Camacho, Fishback, Trumbull, Singleton. Nebraska, Caleb Smith, Allred, Cam McDaniel. Cam McDaniel is just an interesting example. Like if Nebraska thought he wasn't ready and didn't want to redshirt him, they could actually basically Olympic redshirt him, and then his clock wouldn't even start. Cade Lout, Andrew Aliras, Parker Keckheisen, Ohio State, Hoffman, Sasso, Boykin, Buzakis, Mendez. So we talked about how Sasso would definitely get a medical red shirt, but I mean, he wouldn't even need to apply for it. Oklahoma State, Dayton Fix. Penn State, this is unbelievable. Listen to this list. Hart McHenry, Greg Kirkfleet, Aaron Brooks, Alex Facundo, Bo Bartlett, Tyler Kasich, Mitchell Messenbrink, Carter Storaci, Shane Ness, Levi Haynes. The depth of that is ridiculous. Princeton with McGowan, Purdue with Ramos and Rowley, Berge and Sloan at South Dakota State. VTech's got Mackay, Mullen, Andoni, and Cooper Flynn. Braxton Amos at Wisconsin, Yori Volka, Wyoming. I'll say this and then let you comment on it. To me, what's the most interesting thing about that is any old school guys that think that freestyle success does not correlate to NCAA success. If you just put together teams of those guys, that's insane, right?
Yeah. That's insane. That's a lot of depth too from a U.S. perspective. Once again, we're on a USA Wrestling podcast, but like taking those kids and like getting them that exposure at a young age on the U16, U20, U23 scene is, I think, huge for the development also on the collegiate side.
Yeah. There's just – we certainly don't have time in this podcast to have the folk style freestyle discussion / argument, but I don't think folk style is screwing up our freestyle athletes. You know, I mean, because I think the rules are similar enough. I think you could argue folk style is impeding Greco progress, but it's not happening on the freestyle side. These kids are doing great. So, I mean, that's a lot to process there. So who's number one is Saturday. We're recording this on Wednesday, by the way, so thank you for jumping on. I am flying out. This will probably be the one time in the history of our relationship, GT, that I'm flying somewhere this weekend, and perhaps you're not. So I'm on my way to Vegas shortly for the Jiu-Jitsu World Championships, the Masters level, which is Masters means the same thing there it does in wrestling. It's the age group on up. In Jiu-Jitsu, that starts at 31, and they go all the way up to like 60. So it's like Masters 1, Masters 2 every 5 years. Might be 30. I can't remember if it's 30 to 34, 31 to 35 where it starts. But there's also Jiu-Jitsu Con out there. There's a bunch of really cool things going on. So plug for that. Plug to Gary Abbott for helping me get a media pass. Plug to Flow Grappling if you like watching wrestling and you need a fix this weekend besides who's number one. Jiu-Jitsu is pretty awesome to watch. Be some high-level stuff going on. But the wrestling of who's number one has been set. Again, the article is on Flow. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4. There's about 10 girls matches here. And they've done a great job. 2 versus 3, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 3, 1 and 3, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. So pretty awesome here. A couple names that people will probably recognize, like Gabby Gomez, Carly Brooks. Audrey Jimenez is probably, I think, the one that's done the most on the senior level. GT, like she's already done. I watched her wrestle at the U.S. Open. She's super impressive, right?
Oh yeah, she's the real deal,
and obviously young. So the boys matches: Ferrari versus Izzy, Rath versus Manville, Henkel versus Seeley, Castillo versus Kenny, Davino Larkin, Forrest Rainey, Merrill Bartlett, Zepeda Bobassett, Knox DeLuca, Mirasola, Sinclair. So I've been talking to Bill Bassett, Bo's dad, about potentially those guys coming to Hall of Fame duels. So I just made it a point when I saw him at Fargo to go over, shake his hand, because we'd never met in person. And I just asked him, I said, hey, is Bo wrestling here? And he's like, no, we made a choice when he didn't make the world team on when we were going to let him get big. You know, because you're wrestling all the time, it's hard to get big, which I thought was really interesting. And, you know, that's why I said to him, I go, that's really interesting. He's like, yeah, we got to let him grow. You know, he's kind of small. And I'm like, how's that going? He's like, it's going great. He's growing like gangbusters. And so that might not be a phrase he used. That might have been a phrase from my father that I substituted there, but he was getting big. And so now he's up at 138. So it'll be interesting to see him physically. We haven't seen Angelo Ferrari wrestle in a long time. Obviously, he committed to Iowa. Are there any of these either kids or matchups that I'm sure you're going to at least take a peek, but that are super interesting to you?
Well, I think this is kind of where I start to like see some of them come onto the scene, because like some of these matches are like, you know, like timeless classics, right? Like you can throw these on ESPN Classic, and these are just great matches that you can look back at and look at. Hey, these guys wrestled at Who's Number One or whatever, and then all of a sudden they're in the NCAA finals, or they're competing to make a world team on the senior level. So this is kind of like that first opportunity for me personally to kind of maybe associate some, you know, talent with names, because once again, I think that there's other people within the wrestling community that maybe focus on the cadets and juniors and kind of on that way up. And I'm not well versed in that. So that's why I talk to people like, you know, Willie and Earl and the guys at Flow and Gary, and like kind of like, all right, well, that kid's a monster, but I don't really make it to a lot of middle school gyms. So
right. No, that's fair. That's totally fair. You can't be an expert at everything. If you think you are, you're an expert at nothing.
Right. Yeah. And I'm like, listen, I'm going to punt on a lot of this. Now, once again, if I see them at Fargo, then that's a different story, right? So like in the umbrella of USA Wrestling, that's about the best opportunity that I have in order to like start associating kids with talent level, or at the US Open while they got the side-by-sides going on, right?
Yeah.
You know, so I think this is a really cool showcase. I think this is a really great event for wrestling. I think the Who's Number One concept has always done a very good job of showcasing some very talented wrestlers and giving them a platform to be great at. So definitely, if you get a chance to, it's a good event. Lots of great kids, and even better stories on how these guys got there too. So
yeah, and we all want to be the guy or the woman that says, "Hey, I saw that kid first," right? Like, for example, like we had LaDarian Lockett in Missouri Border Brawl as a freshman, and he just won U17 Worlds. And so, like, I was talking to a kid and her mom last night about being in the event, and the mom says, "I know you've had some, you know, really good wrestlers in the past. So when you're able to name drop a LaDarian Lockett and Aaron Brooks, Rocky Elam, Dayton Fix, like people are like, oh my gosh, okay, like, all right, so this is real." And, you know, our event isn't as big as Who's Number One, but so if you take that and sort of extrapolate it out, it's significant. And, you know, Flo does a good job of posting their previous matches. Like they've showed Zahid winning in overtime. I think it was against Miles Martin, like Sasso wrestling Artelona. Like some of these matchups are big time, you know, like, hey, these kids this was when they were good before everybody knew they were good. So that is happening. I got to get the time right because it's 4 p.m. Central. So that's good for me to know. I think that's 2 o'clock on the West Coast, which is where I'll be. So, and it looks like they're breaking it in order. At least they said, here's the order of the matches, and say have the girls first. So the other thing I don't know is the rules. I don't know if they'll do girls freestyle or folk style. I don't know if they'll do folk style college or high school rules. So those are all things that as the person that runs the event, you have the right to decide. So I'd originally heard this was going to be in Arizona, and it's in Parkside. So it'll be interesting to see, but tons of big names. And, there's some guys there and they have some state-on-state crime, like DeLuca and Knox are both from Jersey. A lot, Rath and Manville are both from PA. So ton of Jersey, ton of Pennsylvania in this tournament or in this meet. And then Wisconsin's got Marisola against St. Clair. I think those guys are both actually Askren kids. So that'll be interesting to see who's in whose corner. I wonder if Ben is in one and Max is in the other, or Messenbrink, or if, it might be, I'm sure this happens to you at Grandview, you go to open tournaments and, you sit in one corner and Henderson sits in the other corner. You're not really coaching. You're just making sure they don't screw up the scoreboard and nobody gets hurt kind of thing. It might be something like that, because coaching for one guy is coaching against another guy. And that's certainly not something you'd want to do. So.
For sure.
All right. Well, I think that's it for now. Again, if you're a college wrestling guy, well, a college football guy too. So college football is right around the corner. I know Notre Dame played over in Ireland last weekend, but the full schedule starts this weekend. And, fall, if you're besides wrestling collegiate season and then the summer wrestling season, the fall is fun for all your sort of non-wrestling sports, like football starts, baseball playoffs, that kind of stuff. So a few more months before we're just completely locked into tournaments and stuff every weekend. Shout out to my guys that are going to Jiu-Jitsu Worlds this weekend. Good luck to them. And happy anniversary, Mark and Dana. Anything else, GT?
No, just getting excited here for the fall wrestling season 2 with the Senior Worlds coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So, and that's the first start or the first brick on the road to Paris. So hopefully, once again, more and more stuff coming up that way. So very excited for what's coming in the near future for wrestling.
You do a lot for the sport of wrestling, and I'm blessed you're my friend, and also that we work together on things like this. And you do a lot of trips that are not so much fun, but I have zero sympathy that you have to go to Paris for a week in September. This is one of the 5-star trips for you, I would think. So we'll talk a lot about Senior Worlds the next 2 weeks here, because then you'll be certainly gone at least that 1 week when it happens. And that's also the week of Border Brawl. So, I think Mark and I will try to do a pod, but it might be early on that week.
For sure.
All right. For Mark and for GT, I'm David. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Talk to y'all next week.